The night in Gensokyo was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of leaves outside their home. A warm paper lantern swayed lazily, casting soft orange light against the wooden walls. Inside, the air smelled faintly of brewed tea and accompanying scent of Rand's fur, a blend of clean silk and a hint of foxfire. It was a scent that Kenzuya had grown so familiar with, one that always made his heart slow and his mind settle. Yet tonight, sleep would not come easily. Kenzuya sat on their futon, his tiny hands curled into his lap. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his small frame wrapped in a loose yukata that was just a little too big for him. He had spent countless nights like this, sleepless, restless, plagued by the heavy silence that filled his mind whenever he tried to sleep alone. Rand sat nearby, gracefully running a wooden comb through her golden tails, smoothing out the soft fur as the candlelight danced across her features. She glanced at him, her keen eyes immediately understanding the problem without him needing to say a word. "Kenzuya," she said softly, setting the comb aside. "You're having trouble sleeping again, aren't you?" He gave a small, weary nod. She didn't sigh, didn't scold, didn't tell him to try harder like others had in the past. Instead, she smiled gently and opened her arms. "Then come here." Kenzuya's heart thumped at those words. They were an invitation, one that he had accepted night after night, never growing tired of it. He stood and walked toward her outstretched hands, her golden claws glinting faintly in the dim room. As he climbed onto her palms, he felt her warmth immediately, a living, breathing heat that soothed the deep ache inside him. Rand held him close, pressing him lightly against her chest. Her heartbeat was slow and steady, a rhythm that wrapped around him like a lullaby. He melted against her, his tiny hands resting against the soft silk of her robes. "Are you ready?" she murmured, her breath warm against him. He nodded, his face already flushing slightly. "Yeah." With that, she leaned back onto the futon, her tails fanning out behind her. She cradled him against her stomach, pressing a hand over his back as if to ease him into transition. Kenzuya took a slow breath, then reached up, placing his small hands against her lips. Rand parted them without hesitation, her mouth warm and inviting as she allowed him inside. The moment he pressed forward, he was enveloped in warmth. Her breath was steady, hot against his skin as he crawled deeper, his body slipping past her soft lips and into the gentle embrace of her mouth. The faint scent of lingering tea and the natural sweetness of her body surrounded him, a smell that always filled him with comfort. Her tongue moved beneath him, guiding him carefully, ensuring his descent was smooth and safe. Kenzuya knew this process well, yet it always made his heart race. The feeling of being swallowed was unlike anything else, intimate, safe, and deeply loving in a way that words couldn't capture. As he slid deeper, her throat welcomed him, muscles flexing gently around him in a slow, deliberate motion. There was no rush, no urgency, only the careful, practiced way that Rand took him in, as if savoring the moment just as much as he did. The world outside faded, the flickering candlelight vanishing as he was drawn further inside her. He could hear the muffled, soothing thump of her heart growing stronger, surrounding him like a protective shield. With one final, slow gulp, he passed into her stomach. The space was soft, warm, and snug, cradling him in an embrace unlike any bed ever could. The walls pulsed gently around him, a quiet rhythm that matched her breathing. The sound of her body working, the slow rise and fall of her breath, the distant beat of her heart. It was all so familiar, so deeply soothing. He curled up instinctively, pressing his cheek against the warm, living walls. It was perfect. It was home. Rand let out a quiet, contented sigh as she placed a hand over her belly, feeling the small movements inside. "Are you comfortable?" she asked, her voice carrying through the warmth that surrounded him. Kenzuya smiled to himself, closing his eyes as the steady, rhythmic motion of her body lulled him into drowsiness. "Yeah," he whispered, "this is where I belong." Her fingers traced small, affectionate circles over her stomach. "Then sleep well, my love." As the night deepened, Kenzuya finally drifted into a peaceful sleep, His tiny form nestled safely within her, and Ran, feeling his presence within her, closed her eyes as well. But not all nights could be peaceful. The air outside was thick with the scent of damp earth and lingering foxfire. The night had settled into a tranquil stillness, but Ran Yakumo felt something in the wind. Something wrong. It was subtle at first, a faint shift in the atmosphere, like an unspoken threat creeping through the trees. Her golden ears twitched, her sharp eyes flickering toward the shrouded darkness beyond their home. She had spent years in Gensokyo, leaving behind the brutal ideology of the animal realm, where only strength dictated one's worth. She had found something softer here, something warmer. Kanzuya, a love that existed not in dominance, but in quiet devotion. Yet, the past had a way of lingering, of watching from the shadows until it decided to strike. Ran stood from the futon, careful not to disturb the small presence curled inside her. She placed a hand over her belly, feeling the gentle weight of Kanzuya sleeping within her, his warmth like a tiny ember against her skin. A part of her wanted to stay, to hold him close and pretend the unease was nothing but paranoia. But she knew better. Carefully, she stepped out onto the engawa, the wooden planks cool against her bare feet. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with a voice, low, sharp, familiar. "So, this is where you've been hiding." Ran's tails flared instinctively. From the darkness beyond the trees, a figure emerged, a fox spirit, taller than her, with sleek black fur and piercing gold eyes. His posture was relaxed, but his presence carried weight, like a predator sizing up its prey. Ran's expression remained unreadable, but her stance shifted, subtly guarded. "I am not hiding," she replied coolly. "I left." The dark-furred kitsune scoffed, stepping closer. His voice carried an air of mockery, though his eyes were sharp with something colder. "You left," he repeated, tilting his head. "To become what? A pet to a human so insignificant he could be crushed under my foot." A deep growl rumbled in her throat. "Choose your words carefully." The other fox smirked. "I don't need to. I've already seen the truth for myself. The once mighty Ran Yakumo reduced to this." He gestured lazily to the home behind her. "Do you even remember what you were? What you are?" Ran's fingers curled into fists. "I remember everything." Her voice was calm, steady, but her tails bristled, betraying the storm beneath the surface. "Then why are you still pretending?" His gaze darkened. "You were born in the animal realm. You understand how the world works. Strength is everything. The weak exist to be used. And yet, you've chosen to love something weaker than even a normal human." He sneered. "Tell me, Ran, do you even see him as your equal? Or is he just a comfort, a pet you keep close because it makes you feel something?" Ran's body moved before she could think. The wind howled as she lashed out, blue foxfire erupting around her. The other kitsune barely dodged in time, his form flickering as he leapt back into the shadows. "I see," he mused, a smirk widening. "You've truly lost yourself." Ran bared her fangs. "I have not lost anything," she snarled. "I left because I was disgusted. By you. By all of it. I refuse to live in a world that only values strength." The dark-furred fox chuckled. "Then you are no longer one of us." His golden eyes glowed with something almost pitying. "But you know as well as I do, one day you will regret this. That human of yours, he will never be like you. He will never understand." Ran didn't answer. The fox spirit let the silence linger before stepping back into the shadows, his voice a whisper in the wind. "Enjoy your illusion of peace while it lasts." Then he was gone. Ran remained standing on the engawa for a long moment, her breath steady but slow. Her heart, however, was anything but calm. Finally, she let out a slow exhale, then turned back inside. The warmth of their home welcomed her once more, but she still felt the weight of that encounter pressing against her chest. Carefully, she laid back onto the futon, placing a hand over her belly. The gentle, rhythmic movements inside soothed her, grounding her back into reality. Kanzuya stirred slightly at her touch, shifting within her in his sleep. Even unconscious, he could always feel when something was wrong. Ran whispered, her voice barely audible. It's nothing. Sleep, my love." She wasn't sure if she was trying to comfort him or herself, but as the night stretched on, she held him a little closer, as if afraid that one day the past might try to take him away. Inside the comforting warmth of Rand's stomach, Kazuya stirred. He had been slipping in and out of sleep, lulled by the soft, rhythmic sounds of her body, her heartbeat, the gentle rise and fall of her breath, the faint pulses of warmth that cradled him. It was peaceful, safe, the only place where he could truly rest without the burden of restless thoughts. But then, something changed. The shift was subtle at first, a slight tensing of the soft walls around him. Rand's breathing, usually steady and slow, became sharper. The rhythmic pulse of her body quickened, her muscles tightening instinctively around him. Then, without warning, a violent motion shook him. It was Rand. She was fighting. Panic surged through him. He had never once doubted her strength, but he knew what she was up against. The animal realm had no place for kindness, and they would do anything to drag her back. Kazuya's heart pounded as he braced himself, pressing his hands against the living walls of her stomach to steady himself. Rand was moving, fast, forcefully. He could feel her body twisting, the way her core tensed, the slight jolts that came with each shift in her stance. She was fighting. A deep, rumbling growl vibrated through her body, low and dangerous. Kazuya clenched his fists, his breathing shallow. He had never felt Rand like this before, so charged, so fierce. It wasn't fear that filled him, but something else. Something heavier, more complex. She's angry. He could feel it, not just in the way her body tensed around him, but in the very essence of her. It was a protective anger, a force that burned like foxfire, hot, unwavering. And yet, he couldn't help but feel the ache of it too, the hurt beneath the rage. Who is she fighting? Why? The walls of her stomach squeezed slightly, her muscles clenching before releasing. He curled into himself, gripping the soft, warm walls for support. He wasn't in pain. Rand would never hurt him, but he could feel the stress in every fiber of her being. "Rand!" he called, his voice barely a whisper against the steady hum of her body. Her breath hitched, her movements pausing for just a moment. Blue flames roared around her, fierce and unyielding. The other fox spirit stumbled back, his sneer faltering. A distant voice, muffled, distorted by layers of flesh and warmth. He couldn't make out the words, but he recognized the tone was sharp and condescending. Even though he couldn't understand what was being said, he could feel the weight of it in her every movement, the deep resolve in her voice. It was fierce and defiant. Kazuya closed his eyes, pressing his cheek against the pulsing warmth that surrounded him. He swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. He had always known Rand was strong. Her power was unquestionable. He couldn't fight alongside her. All he could do was be here and to trust her. The fight continued outside, but within her, Kazuya felt something shift. With one final surge of power, Rand unleashed a wave of foxfire that sent him reeling. "Leave," she commanded, her voice ringing through the trees. "And never return." The tension in her body eased slightly, the harsh movements softening. He felt her tail settle, the deep breaths she took becoming slower, more controlled. It was over. Rand exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. Then, pressing a hand to her stomach, she whispered, "It's over." It was a small thing, just a faint, affectionate pressure from the outside, but it spoke volumes. "I knew you'd win." Rand let out a small, breathy chuckle. "I couldn't have done it without you." Kazuya let out a slow breath, allowing himself to relax again, his body sinking deeper into the warmth. Rand lay back on the futon, her golden tail spread around her like a blanket of soft moonlight. The tension in her body had faded, replaced by a deep, lingering exhaustion. The confrontation had drained her, not physically. No, she was far too strong for that. But emotionally, the words of the dark-furred kitsune still echoed in her mind, whispers of a past she had long since left behind. Rand placed a gentle hand over her stomach, feeling the love of her life nestled deep within her. A warmth spread through her chest as she felt Kazuya's breathing inside her. Even now, after the storm had passed, he remained. "Are you awake?" she asked softly. For a moment, there was only silence, and then, yeah. His voice was quiet, almost drowsy, but there was something more to it, something tender. Rand smiled, her fingers tracing slow circles over her belly. I'm sorry if I startled you, she murmured. I never want you to feel afraid inside of me. I wasn't afraid. His voice was small but firm. I hated that you had to fight it all. Her ears flicked slightly, surprised by his words. Kazuya was so in tune with the life within her, the gentle way she carried him, how every part of her embraced him in warmth and devotion. He had no words for what this feeling was. This connection between them was special. It was love. But love was such a small word for something so infinite. I love you, Rand, he whispered, closing his eyes. Not just because you protect me. Not just because I feel safe with you. But because you chose me. Rand's breath hitched. A tiny, fragile human. One so small he fit within the palm of her hand. One who had no strength in the way the animal realm valued it. Had given her his heart completely. And without hesitation, she had given him hers in return.